All right, welcome back. Today we are going into second part of Introduction to Research Methodology. And in this section, we'll be talking about meaning and importance of research, classification of research, right? And then research in also like engineering functions, also not only in business, how you can actually use this in engineering functions and the research process that I dwelled into, I discussed into some detail level in the last lecture, but last streaming. This time I'm going to have some kind of or bird's eye view on that also, and then research as a scientific process, and then also issues governing research function, listing and description of steps of research, and so on and so forth. So for 15-20 minutes, so we'll be actually having some kind of in-depth discussion on this topic. However, over the period of time, we will have multiple ways to look into this as an exercise in the classroom, and then also data collection, and then analyzing and observing that all of these process over the period of the study period. So, what is the meaning of research then? Research is like an of common parlance that refers to a research for knowledge, re and search. So, search for knowledge, like you have some kind of prior knowledge, but you want to build on that, you want to go further on that. Like once you can also define this as a scientific and systematic search for pertinent information on a specific topic. So you'll have a boundary condition, you will have objective, you have research question, and then based on that, you build a scientific process, a systematic process to search for information and analyze that data, and then also have knowledge out of it. So in that sense, in academic activity, like enough, you can think of this um, as given by Clifford Woody, who said that research comprises defining and redefining problems, defining and redefining problems, formulating hypotheses or suggested solutions, and collecting, organizing, and evaluating data. Out of that, you make deductions and reach conclusions, and at the last, carefully test the conclusions to determine whether they fit the formulating hypothesis or not. So you have a research problem, you have some level of research question or objectives, and based on those objectives, you do literature search, come up with some level of hypothesis, and then in that hypothesis, you collect data based on questionnaire, and then also or qualitative data as per various methods in qualitative data, and then you go for testing it, analyzing it in softwares, and then come up with whether your hypotheses are accepted or refuted. Okay, so what is the objective of research is to gain familiarity with a phenomenon or to achieve new insights into it. Like for example, it can be exploratory or formative research studies, right? This can be also thought about to portray accurately the characteristics of a particular individual, situation, or a group that you want to study, or that is the way of looking into your understanding of that personal person or situation or group. In this kind of studies, it is called descriptive research studies. Previously, it was exploratory, right? The number one. The third one you can think of like to determine the frequency with which something occurs, right? This kind of research is called diagnostic research. To test a hypothesis of a causal relationship between variables, and such studies are known as hypothesis testing research studies. Predominantly in business and social sciences, people are in a way getting into quantitative path. That means survey-based research mostly, but qualitative research are also equally powerful. So there can be descriptive and analytical research. What kind of types? Like we saw that. So in descriptive, it includes surveys and facts in finding inquiries of different kinds, right? That's the descriptive. And then if you go further into analytical research, then on the other hand, the research has to use facts and information already available and analyze these to make a critical evaluation of the materials. That's another approach. It can be applied versus fundamental. Applied research is like finding a solution for an immediate problem facing a society or industrial or engineering problem, business problem. Okay. Then you can think of fundamental or to basic or pure research, like enough is mainly concerned with generalizations and with the formulation of a theory. So you can build a theory, test a theory, right? Another angle to look into the same thing is quantitative versus qualitative, right? So quantitative research is based on the measurement of quantity or amount. Qualitative research is, on the other hand, is concerned with qualitative phenomena like relating to or involving quality or kind similar. It can be conceptual or empirical on the another dimension. It's like an if it's a conceptual, it's related to some abstract ideas or theory. If it is empirical, then it is database research. That means numbers or other data like interview data or text data or other focus group data, anything that you can get. So, in another angle, the another classification is that also whether the research is longitudinal or cross-sectional. Longitudinal means over the time, and then cross-sectional means only one time. So that can be also something that you can think about. Okay. There can be clinical diagnostics, there can be conclusion oriented or decision oriented. There can be one-time research or longitudinal research, I just mentioned you, and there can be field setting research or laboratory research. This can be there also. Okay. So in the exploratory research, it may be formalized. The objective of exploratory research is the development of hypotheses rather than their testing. Whereas formalized research studies are those with substantial structure and specific hypotheses to be tested. Okay. Historical research is that which utilizes historical sources like documents, remains to etc. To study events or ideas of the past, including the philosophy of persons and groups at any remote point of time. There can be that angle also, right? So look into further, like if you look into in detail, so what is quantitative and what is qualitative, we touched upon previously in multiple classifications. They can be in quantitative approach, this can be subclassified into inferential, experimental, and simulation approaches. So you can derive an inference, you can have experimental approach, and also you can have a simulation approach. In qualitative approach to research, it is concerned subjective assessment of attitudes, opinions, and behaviors. In consumer behavior, in understanding products and solutions in engineering departments, these kind of studies can be important as well. These can be unique ways of looking into these things. Um, when you look into the research methodology, we not only talk of the research methods, but also consider the logic behind the methods, like whether it is deductive reasoning, that means theory, literature, hypothesis, and then also the data collection, analysis, and validation, or collecting the data based on the interest, phenomenon's interest that you are interested into the phenomena, and then go to collect data, and then come up with the coding, and then try to make the theory out of it. That is inductive reasoning. So previous one was deductive reasoning, and this one is inductive reasoning. Most of the time, people use abductive reasoning. That means combining both. Okay? Now let's look into various ways of doing research, like in the method side. So if you have library research, you can have methods like analysis of historical records, analysis of documents, and so on and so forth. If you're in a field research, you can have non-participant direct observation. You can have participants observations, mass observation, mail questionnaire, opinionaire, personal interview, focus interview, group interview, telephone survey. All these methods can be used. Case study and life history can also be used. In lab, you can use small group study of random behavior, play and role analysis, and so on and so forth. Okay? Many ways to collect data. So how do you formulate a research problem then? Okay, so like process, how it is good. First, you have to formulate the research problem, then have the questionnaires on that idea. I mean, research questions and objectives on that idea, and you have extensive literature survey, then develop the hypothesis, and prepare the research design, determine the sample design, collect the data, execute the project further, analyze the data, hypothesis testing is done, and then generalize and interpret the findings. After all of these, don't underestimate the power of your assignment that you'll be doing as the preparation of the report. So you have to understand how to write academic report also in this part. So this will give you formal write-up of conclusions reached out of this process. So there are 11 items that I describe about the process. Okay. So in general, that way, it seems like a linear process, but you will be going back and forth. Even in writing phase or analyzing phase or design phase, you have to think which phases you have to come back again and then redo, because it is not a linear process, it's a zigzag process. Sometimes you fail in data collection, you fail in your hypothesis, and then you have to redo many of the things again. All right. So how do you formulate research problem then? You can have two types of research problems, like those which relate to states of nature and those which relate to relations between variables. That means study variables that you are choosing. And that you can understand by extensive literature survey. That means you have to go to complete review of the literature, at least 30, 40 articles on that particular one from Google Scholar, and then build the proper hypothesis out of that. After extensive literature survey, you should state in clear terms what is your working hypothesis or how many hypotheses you have. And that gives an assumption behind, based on the literature, what might be the outcome. And then after that, you prepare a design, whether it is descriptive design, exploratory design, or diagnosis or experimentation. You can look into various ways to look into your data collection part. You can have experimental designs, right? You can have non-experimental hypothesis testing. You can have formal designs like randomized design and so on and so forth. Okay. Then you go for sample design. You have the research design, like how you want to do the research, and then you have to go to the sample design, because if you are not having a random sample from the population, it is questioned whether you have done the research properly or not. And then there can be many ways of sampling. We can do that in sampling chapter. I'm naming only here. Deliberate sampling is one. Simple random sampling mostly uses the one. And then also systematic sampling is there. Then stratified sampling is there. And then also you go for quota sampling. You're gonna have also multi-stage sampling. You're gonna have sequential sampling and so on and so forth. We'll dwell into these in detail in the sampling part itself. Here I'm giving a glimpse of what can be done. And after that, when you have the sample collected, designed, then you have the collecting the data by observation, through personal interview, through telephone interviews, by mailing of questionnaires, through schedules, and so on and so forth. Then you analyze the data in your mostly in qualitative type. You have to code the data and then also categorize it, edit it, tabulate it, and then come to an analysis of a table and then interpret that as a way. In a hypothesis test, you have to test the hypothesis like chi-square test, t-test, f-test. Wow, so many tests you can do in your hypothesis testing part. And hypothesis testing will result in either accepting the hypothesis or rejecting it. After that, you have to generalize and interpret the findings. And then finally, you prepare the report of the thesis. All right. This is very interesting, like how you can do the research, what are the steps, why it is important. Like for example, if you want to come up with a new product in engineering department, and you are struggling with whether consumers will like it or not, or there's a demand or not, and then whether it will have quality function deployment into this or not, you can go to consumer survey or focus group with the consumers. So it will help you in your proper decision making. So you can figure out whether this will fly or not. Having said that, in engineering, if you use some of the technologies in startups, but startups are more challenging than the existing businesses. At least in existing business, you have some kind of consumer behavior understood in previous product or solutions. If you are just enhancing the features and products, then it can go pretty well. For example, A telecommunication service provider can think of their various packages, their various 3G services, 4G services, and now so-called 5G services coming into the market. In these services, what kind of behavior, consumer adoption behavior will be there would be interesting from the research perspective. Whether it will fly or not, that would be a very good information for decision making in planning phase, in building phase, in ramping phase, all the way it needs valuable information. I wish you have figured out your research problem so far now. You have understood what is to be researched. Now, in the next chapter, when we go for next video, we will talk about research design in detail. That is unit 2. Of course, literature review is implicit everywhere now in this chapter. I'm not going to build that as a separate session, but that is also very, very important. But then in the next chapter, stay tuned for the research design. All right. Thank you very much. Keep watching. If you like this video, subscribe my channel. Please do so.